welcome on this afternoon. Glad you're all here. We're a bit closer than usually, but I think you can understand why we decided to not do it on stage, but in front of us. My name is Tim Wagemakers. I work for the Balie, and well, you're at the 6th edition of the Human Rights Watch weekend. Who has visited any other program this weekend already? Oh, that's quite a good score. Who is going to visit another program this Sunday? Also a quite good score. I saw some people who haven't raised their hands for either one of the questions. That's a bit less of a score, but okay, you are forgiven. But at the end of this program, I will give you some suggestions, which I think you should follow, because there are some really nice programs still to come. You're now at the program The Forgotten Billion, and it's quite in line, actually, I think, with the theme of the Human Rights Watch weekend, which is Where Do I Stand? And we want you to reflect on your own role in human rights issues. And on this event, we want to talk about the inclusion or exclusion of people with disabilities in our discussion, both locally but also internationally. For example, we will talk about refugees who flee from, for example, Syria to Germany, but also about how our education system in the Netherlands might include or exclude people. And it's really a privilege to speak to 4 people tonight who can tell us so much about it. I will introduce them. Don't worry, they will also introduce their work themselves. So if you miss out on one detail, it will come back later. But first, you will listen to Nujeen Mustafa, who's sitting here. She's 18 years old. She fled from Syria to Germany. And it was quite an exhausting trip. You have to imagine, you know all the stories from people going with a boat to cross the Mediterranean Sea, living in refugee camps. Well, she did all that, but then in a wheelchair. So it's quite a remarkable story that she will tell to you. And she also spoke, for example, to the European Parliament about her story. So, Eugene, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure. I'd also like to introduce Shantha Rau Barriga. She works for Human Rights Watch. She is the Director, Disability Rights Division, and she works on a variety of issues, such as the shackling of people with, I have to say it correctly, psychosocial disabilities. And she works all over the globe, from Ghana to the Central African Republic to China, Indonesia, Morocco, Nepal. I think almost every country was listed on this sheet, so I'll stop there, but many countries. And she will tell about her work. Next to her is José Smits. She was a former member of parliament in the Netherlands. She now works as an independent policy advisor. She works for many organizations, such as the Inclusion Europe, an association of people with intellectual disabilities. She's member of the Catalyst for Inclusive Education. She's member of ANET, the academic network of European disability experts. I'm sorry I didn't rehearse this by heart, but there are so many functions you are having. And she also works on an inclusive education project in one school for the Dutch branch of Defense for Children. So she can tell us all about, well, the role of the Netherlands also, I think, in how we treat people with disabilities, and also from personal experience, I think you have some things to tell. And lastly, we have Stefan Russel. He is a data analyst. He was the director of the Amsterdamse Welzijnsstichting for Doven, for deaf people. And he will tell us today about his work. He's active in advocacy, mainly on the facility of sign language interpreters. Unfortunately, the sign language interpreter today fell ill, but we are very happy that his sister Martina will serve as the sign language interpreter. Well, I think if there's anyone who can interpret what a brother says, then it would be you. So thank you so much for being here on such short notice. And Stefan will tell us about the issues he faced in the Netherlands, because if there's one thing I hope we can do today is connect the international to the local, because it's easy to talk about what's happening all across the globe, but how are we doing in the Netherlands with regard to human rights issues, and also with regard to helping people with disabilities. The program is fairly easy. Everyone will tell their story and will engage in discussion. Since we're with well, a good crowd of people, but not so many that we have to scream all over to get each other heard. Please pitch in if you have any questions during the program, because I think we have room for that. And it's my job to make sure that at around 3:30 or 4:15, we're finished. But let's first begin with the remarkable story of you, Eugene. And we have a short clip that, well, shows something of it. Let's see it.
This is Nujeen. She fled the war in Syria in a wheelchair.
Living in a war in your teenage years is not a good thing at all. And particularly as someone with disability, you would always have this sense of pain and guilt because I thought maybe my family cannot evacuate if something happened because of me. We resolved to make the journey to Greece in 2015, and that was really hard.
Eugene eventually made it to Germany, but many refugees with disabilities are still trapped in Greece. They don't have access to basic services such as toilets and running water.
That makes you official now.
Being here and sitting in this room, it's kind of a sad fact that in the 21st century, toilets and basic services are considered a luxury for some people, and this should never happen.
Nujeen is pushing the European Union to make sure that aid reaches all refugees, including people with disabilities.
I would love to address the Commissioner. All of us, and especially people with disabilities, deserve much better.
Yeah. Nujeen, maybe can you tell us something about, well, that remarkable journey that brought you from Syria to talking to the Commissioner of the European Parliament to tell your story? Can you tell us something about your story?
Well, it's a pretty long one. And thus I would like to start with a bit of introduction about myself. So I was, as you've seen in the video, I was born with cerebral palsy. I grew up in Aleppo, Syria, in a fifth floor apartment with no lift. So I did not attend any school until I got to Germany. I fled my home country in 2015 and crossed eight countries, if you include Germany, to get to safety. Of course, when the war broke out in Syria, it was really stressful and psychologically hard for me to cope with it. Even though I tried to do my best and stay cheerful, of course I was worried that I would be the only barrier between my family and safety. We feared that the city would be bombed and that we would not be able to leave. So we just left pretty hastily, and I'm glad we did. Because otherwise it would have been hard if it had gotten harder for us. Yeah. So, and now I'm happy to report that I am in Germany now. I attend school, and I have the life of a normal teenage girl. Homework, fangirling, TV shows, exams. But it's not that every teenage girl gets to talk to the Commissioner of the European Parliament. I think that might be a difference. Yeah, that is a huge difference. I think arriving in Europe, I realized that it has now become my duty to voice refugees, and especially refugees with disabilities, to tell people about their struggles. I mean, I had been in Greece for a week when I had first arrived, and there was no accessible toilet for me, so we had to switch the camp. So to feel like you are being left out, you are not being considered, is really hard, and especially it's actually shocking to think that when preparing yourself for people coming out of a conflict zone, to not be prepared for people being traumatized and maybe disabled.
Yeah. So. Because your story, well, it kind of is a story where in the end it worked. You got to Germany, you were able to flee. Did you hear many stories of people who were in your position but couldn't get out?
Yes, of course. Many people's stories were much harder, and
I had like my neighbors in the camp, and I still to this day don't know what happened to them, whether they made it or not. So, and their condition was much harder. So yes, you could consider my story to have had a happy ending, but I don't know what happened to the others. No.
So you got to talk in the European Commission,
yes.
but you said you want to give the voice to the people who are maybe also left there
yes.
in a broader perspective. What is your biggest plea? What is your biggest question or advice that you want to spread?
The thing is to not leave us behind, and to keep us in your mind when considering an area of conflict, and actually stopping the reason that it is making us suffer in the first place, which all these conflicts that are breaking everywhere in the world. The most recent one being especially closer to my heart, which is in North Syria, where Kurds live in Afrin. So I think to actually stop the reason we are suffering, and then when that happens, actually to think of these people who have actually lost everything, who might be injured, who might be traumatized, who might have difficulty comprehending that they have to flee again and again from one place to the other. Yeah. So.
Well, if there's someone who can voice it, I think it's you, because you talk so passionate about it, and you're so good at explaining what the situation is and what you want. What are you? Are you going to college now?
I'm still at my last year at school, and yeah. So.
And what do you want to do? What do you want to study?
I want to study some physics. Yeah.
Physics.
Yeah, it's great. I think I want to tackle the mysteries of the universe. Why there is more matter than antimatter. Why can't we travel in the speed of light? Is there one universe or multiverse? So a lot of, and of course, whether we were alone. Maybe I can find an alien, but I don't know in which language I would speak.
Well, and lastly, before we later can also discuss more things, we're also trying to connect things that happen, in Syria, in conflict areas, to our Western world, where we think sometimes that everything is okay. Is there something that you in Germany now think like we should also take that into consideration? I'm now in Germany, but my situation is still the same. Is there also a plea in that we might also look at ourselves in how we approach or how we give space to people who have disabilities?
Well, in terms of my life right now, I think we have chosen the best country to be in terms of the way, in terms of the acceptance of people with disability. But I know that it's not like that on the whole of Europe, and I think that we should be more active about making people with disabilities feel at home, that they are valuable, that their efforts are being heard and are valued. And I, as a young girl, I've had a major self-worth issues because I felt sometimes that I couldn't do anything. So I think it's important to raise the importance of the subject, that we should make them feel at home, like they are active in their society, that they can do something for others. Yeah, so that's the issue in Europe that I would like to work on more, which is to make people with disability feel more active and included in their society.
Do you feel at home now in Germany?
Yeah, I feel pretty much at home, and I take on what I want from the German society and the German mentality, and I keep some of my own identity as well. So
yeah. Shantha Rau Barriga, you work for Human Rights Watch. You also actually work together with Nujeen for the video in the European Parliament. Can you tell us something about how you work together?
Sure. When we found out Nujene's...
The microphone a bit.
Sure. When we first saw Nujeen, I think she was covered by the BBC and other journalists who were tracking her. Do you remember along the way? And because she does have a remarkable story. One of the things I remember most is when you talked about how you were the situation on the dinghy boat.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell that?
Yeah, great. So, it was really hectic. Our group was really worried that the wheelchair is gonna puncture a hole in the dinghy. And that we would all drown because of it. Because it was really heavy, but everything at the moment everything was done so hastily that I was almost left behind. So they just carried me to the dinghy because they wanted to set off before the sea guards switch shifts. Yeah, so. It wasn't a nice experience to feel like you are the only obstacle or that you are feared and considered a concern or a risk by just taking you. Yeah.
And we met several people who had experiences also who were even most recently in Greece. We met a man who uses a wheelchair and told us how that no one wanted to transport him in his wheelchair across the water. And they said, you leave your wheelchair behind or we're going to leave you behind. And the man said, well, would you say I'm going to leave your feet here and transport the rest of you? This wheelchair to me is like my legs. And so I refused to leave it behind. And then they ended up bringing it actually on the way. But it required a fight. And it reminded me of your own experience. But we heard about Nujeen and we realized that we really found an incredible advocate who had firsthand experiences on the challenges. And because she was so much covered in the news, we actually could very easily track her down in Germany about a year and a half ago and started to think about how we could collaborate. And one of the main advocacy goals was really to get the European Union to pay attention to the fact that people with disabilities are ignored, not only in the crisis in Greece, from Syria and from Iraq and from Afghanistan, but also we had been documenting in South Africa, in South Sudan and Central African Republic, how people with disabilities were left behind in the humanitarian crisis. And the European Union is the largest funder for these crises. And so we organized a panel and took Nujeen's story to the European Union Commissioner, the highest official who is responsible for humanitarian aid. And he came for an hour and a half and he stayed the whole time. He heard Nujeen's story. And this was a unique partnership, not only with Nujeen, but also with the European Disability Forum. We always work with organizations of people with disabilities in the work we do, giving them a voice to advocate for themselves. And we also partnered with the Norwegian Refugee Council, a humanitarian organization on the ground that said to us, you know what? We hadn't even thought about how to include people with disabilities in our work. And we need to do something about that. So please push us. And in fact, they were the ones also calling in that meeting to the commissioner to said, you need to set regulations on us. When you give us funding for humanitarian assistance, you need to make sure that we use this funding to reach everyone. Otherwise, essentially, it's discrimination when some people, such as people with disabilities, are left out. And to have that group say, make sure that we're doing a better job to the commissioner, I think, coupled with Nujeen's personal testimony that you saw in the video, I think really compelled the commissioner.
Could you also explain, because this is one remarkable case, actually, and it also, well, I think it's a perfect example of how one story stands for a bigger picture, but there is a bigger picture and you do more work in this field. Can you tell something about the other disability rights work that you've been working on right now?
Sure. Well, just to conclude the commissioner, we, in December, so this video was taken and this event was in March last year. Yeah. And in December last year, the European Commissioner's office invited us for a meeting and told us that 1 week later he would be announcing that all EU funding for humanitarian assistance now must include people with disabilities. It's part of their regulations for all the proposals that they're calling for as of 2018. And we have to thank Nujeen and the advocacy we did together with the European Disability Forum and Norwegian Refugee Council for making that happen. So
wow.
It's been a really remarkable...
That's on you, huh?
Yeah, I just got it via a Facebook post, and you have no idea how proud I was. And I think it's one of the biggest joys in the world to know that your work has paid off. So it's one of the things. It's one of the things I'm proud of the most. So hopefully we will keep it up together, right?
Yes, there's lots more we have to do together. But turning to some of our other work, so besides crisis, we also work on access to education for children with disabilities. We do work on kids and adults living in institutions, many of whom are locked up for years simply because they have a disability. And we also do work on violence against people with disabilities. And one of the projects is actually funded by the Dutch postcode. And it's a new project that we started this year on kids with albinism in Tanzania. And we're looking to do this more across the African continent. But if you have albinism, and if you're not familiar, albinism is when you have a loss in pigmentation in your skin. And it also affects your eyesight, and it makes you more vulnerable to skin cancer. And what we found is that children with albinism in many African countries are considered their special magical gifts. So if people have this belief that if you chop off the limb of someone with albinism, then it brings you good luck. And it still happens today. And so we're trying to draw attention to this, and because there's this risk of death and risk of severe mutilation, there's, I think we're going to show us a couple of photos on the screen here. There's also an effort to put you in a shelter to keep you safe, but at the same time, then you're separated from your family, and then you're separated from your communities, and then you're living, a couple of slides. Yeah, so this is a child with albinism you see here. And the next slide is some of the kids in a school where they're often segregated. Should we show this film? And you can get a sense of the issue that we're working on now.
Tumefichwa hapa, vingine vyote watatuua sisi. Wanafikiri tumerogwa, kwa sababu sisi tumezaliwa tukiwa weupe. Sisi ni watu wenye ualbino.
Kwamba watakuwa matajiri na mali nyingi ikiwa watapata mifupa ya mtu mwenye ualbino. Hii yote ni ushirikina. Ndio sababu wanatuinda sisi mpaka sasa.
Wewe sasa hivi ukija kumwona mamako, utamjuaje kama ni mamako?
Kwa kweli yani mimi labda tu nikimwona labda nitamjua.
Maybe just an in-between question. In all your work, we've already discussed, I think, two things, or we've noticed two things. There is this element of not thinking about it. That's also what you called for in the European Parliament. Mm-hmm. Think about it, make it one of your first priorities when you decide how to regulate. There's this aspect of being an obstacle, what you felt like, I'm an obstacle, so that's why I'm excluded. And there's this element of being not normal. right? Because you're magical. In all your work, what would you say is the biggest priority right now? What do you feel? It's a priority that we have to remove people seeing as obstacles. I mean, we have to do all three things, but you notice maybe a pattern of what's happening.
Well, I mean, similar to this work on albinism, one of the things I find most challenging is how people with disabilities feel so much stigma. I don't know if others can address this too, but if you skip back to a couple of slides, sorry, I don't have my clicker here. We've done work, for example, in 2 countries in Africa, in Ghana and in Somaliland, and you see here how people are actually even put in chains because they have mental health conditions or disabilities. This is actually, if you go to the previous slide before this. No, sorry, next slide then. That foot you saw with the chains around it is actually a 12-year-old girl, whom I actually think is deaf, Stefan, and she doesn't speak. And so her family thought she was possessed by the devil and brought her to this camp, this spiritual camp, where they thought the leaders can heal her through prayer. And I find that this is really one of the most challenging things, is to convince people that someone has a disability. It's actually not because of some curse or some demons or some other explanation, and that it's completely part of human diversity. It's in fact 1 in 7 people have a disability. 1 billion people in the world have a disability. We all probably know someone in our families, in our communities, in our workplace who has a disability, and it's just that people don't generally talk about it, so it becomes so stigmatizing to share that you yourself may have a disability.
Maybe that's a good moment to, before I go to Stefan, to start with José, because you've been working on inclusion and disability rights for so many years. I think we've heard Shantha explain quite good how people still have a stigma. Have you seen that change in the Netherlands in how we perceive people with disabilities?
No, I haven't seen a change in the Netherlands. Of course, there are people with disabilities, and I think the general attitude is that the Netherlands take good care of people with disabilities. The Dutch government spends a lot of money on people with disabilities. In fact, it's 27 billion on long-term care alone, of which half is spent on people below 65 years of age. So that would be people with intellectual disabilities and mental health problems. And it stays, although we have ratified the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities, the Dutch were almost one of the last countries to ratify it, but it hasn't changed any policies yet. And it's not really, disability rights are human rights, but the Netherlands have a superior attitude, and I think human rights issues are not a matter of Dutch politics. It's everywhere else in the world, but not in the Netherlands. We do things right, even for people with disabilities. So, and it's a big mistake. Shantha, you showed a little child in shackles. Here in the Netherlands, we do chain people with disabilities. You may have remember the case of Brandon. He was a young man with psychosocial disabilities, and they shackled him, basically, for over a year. And he's not an exception. It happens to a lot of people. 1 in 4 patients in mental health hospitals are locked up. They're secluded and experience restrictive measures. People die in mental health hospitals. There's a lot of sexual abuse. And we don't change that policy. Another problem is education. I think Stefan will talk about that as well. We have over 5,000 children who are exempted from education because of a disability. And Dutch government doesn't want to change it. Because
explain me how that works.
Well, if a child reaches the age of 4 or 5, you're supposed to go to school. If you have a disability, you can try to go to a school, but the school may refuse you. If you have a disability, a lot of schools refuse, so you either go to special education, special schools. 80% of children with severe disabilities go to a segregated special school, which is a violation of the human right. But over 5,500 children are not even accepted in special schools, and they're formally exempted from the duty to go to school.
And why would they not be accepted? What's the...
It might be because the school doesn't want to provide the necessary support, and it might be, and it usually is within this group, is that they think you're too disabled to learn, to be able to learn.
And are you talking, just to get the picture clear, are you talking about especially intellectually disabled, or are you talking about physical disabilities?
Intellectually disabled.
Okay. Yeah.
If you have a physical disability, it's recognized that you go to a school, but you might be forced to go to a special school. But intellectual disabilities, it's a real problem, or autism. Or,
Stefan, I'd like to turn to you because actually we've been talking about many things with regard to how we perceive, how we deal, how we include people with disabilities. Maybe you can tell us, because you prepared something about your experiences in that field. And then I also look to Martina too. Yeah.
Ik wil veel meer verhalen vertellen over mijn tijd op Tovengoon.
I would like to share my story about the time I had in the Dutch education system.
Speciaal onderwijs.
It was special education, so separated from the normal education.
Over 30 jaar geleden.
Yeah, I'm talking about 30 years ago.
Toen moest ik leren zagen en timmeren.
Yeah, the education I got was to learn how to saw and to work a hammer. Yeah, and nothing else.
Ik kreeg veel ruzie met de docenten. Ik vervelde me zo.
Yeah, so he was getting into trouble a lot in school because he was bored, because he was just doing hammering and sawing. And not just me, but my whole class was experiencing problems.
Op een dag moet ik naar de directeur.
So one day I was called into the principal's office.
Ik vervecht de hele tijd hetzelfde verhaal. Je kan niet meer vervechten. Je bent het zo slim.
Yeah, so he was expecting always the same story that the principal said. No, you shouldn't expect more because you're not that smart. So.
Maar de directeur zegt anders. Hij zegt tegen mij: als je meer vindt, moet je niet vervechten. Dat men grappen jouw werk geeft.
So this time the principal said something different. He said, even if you do get a higher education, then still if you go into the workforce, they won't give you a job.
Dus als je leert te timmeren, heb je betere kans dat je werk krijgt.
So if you learn how to work with a hammer, that's your best chance to get a job when you grow up.
Dus de directeur spreekt voor maatschappij.
Yeah, so in his eyes, the principal spoke for the whole, the whole society.
Maar toen was ik te jong om te geloven. Ik was op 30, toen ben ik weggegaan uit school.
Yeah, so he said I was too young to believe it, and I was too, opstandig.
Rebel.
I felt like a rebel.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll leave the school and find my own way.
Op oudere school, niet de Tovengoon. Ontwikkelen mijn pater. op een gegeven moment zit ik op universiteit voor een autokunde.
So he went to another school, another special school, and he developed much quicker with the help of interpreters. So he ended up at the university and he studied physics. So that's a nice.
I have some company.
Yeah.
Great.
Maar nee, 30 jaar lang tot op vandaag moet ik wel vaker taken en verder directeur zeggen.
Dus hij zegt al 30 jaar lang denk ik eigenlijk al... Oh, sorry. So 30... Sorry, it's a lot of languages in my head.
It's going fine.
Okay, so for 30 years... I think back to what the principal said to me.
Misschien had ik toch veel beter moeten timmeren om het makkelijker te maken voor mezelf.
Yeah, so he may have had a point, and if he had learned to saw and work a hammer, it might have been easier for him to get a job than it has been in the past 30 years.
Maar toch ben ik blij dat ik heb geluisterd.
But still, I'm very happy that I did listen to him.
Yeah. It's remarkable. And also then I could ask you maybe the same question as I asked José. Do you see a change? Because this was 30 years ago, and clearly you see someone who said to you, let's go for the path of the least resistance. If you just use your hammer and then we can work it out, we can get you placed in the workforce, but we don't want to challenge you intellectually to become maybe something more than just that. Do you see a difference now? Because you talk to so many people about the education system and the place of disabilities.
Ik ontmoet andere toffe mensen, jonger zijn dan ik. Ze hebben allemaal hetzelfde verhaal als mij. Maar ook tof die ouderen zijn dan ik, ook hetzelfde verhaal.
So he says the deaf people he now talks to that are younger to him all have the same story, and even people that are older than him all experience the same story as he does. So he doesn't see any change.
No. Nujeen, how was that for you in school?
Well, as I said, I've never attended school in Syria.
No.
But I totally understand your point, because that's a classic case. I had it as well, which is people not expecting much from you, not much being expected from people with disability, which is the reason I absolutely hated meeting a person for the first time, because there was already this evaluation of my abilities and what I could do. I was a really quiet child and didn't talk very much, so they probably has thought that I had a severe disability and couldn't speak as well. But I tried it in my own way to defy that, and that's where my passion for learning and educating myself grew.
Yeah.
And so far I'm proud of the results. I speak English, German, and maybe soon Dutch as well. I attend school and I'm pretty much happy. I don't think why the rest of the society thinks that we are miserable and that we cannot be something intellectually in our lives. And I think even in the case of disability, there's this kind of spectrum of normalcy. I mean, someone sitting on a wheelchair is still considered normal, to the outside world. But I think maybe someone with a severe mental illness or disability still has the stigma of not being normal or crazy. Yeah. So I think even in this disability society, there's this kind of spectrum of normalcy and abnormality.
Also within the group of, if you have a range of people with different disabilities, you see also within that group of people, if you can call it a group or if you can generalize, you see the same problems of how people look at each other within the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, to expect that just to have the doubt or the expectation that someone would never go far in life is is just hurting and discrimination. To just think that he has no rights to go to school just because he is too disabled. That's a violation of a human right, as Shantha said. So we experience that even in our own group.
José, maybe, because I don't want to get all into semantics here, but maybe you can say something. What, according to you, truly is this word inclusion? I mean, we've been talking about all the time, exclusion, inclusion. What do you think is, because then we can also look at what we should do or how we can change the system so that, well, these cases don't happen anymore. What, according to you, is inclusion?
Well, maybe right now I'm inclined to say that we should consider everyone as equal. I feel we attach less value to the lives of people with a disability, and we shouldn't do that. We are all equal. And if you have a disability, you need another kind of support from society than people without a disability. And I think it's when you consider people with disability, it's often regarded as we have to put in a lot of effort to get them an education or to get them adapted transport or everything else. But it's if you look around the kind of support I get or you all get as persons without a disability, well, at least I consider, I expect you. We organize our society in a lot of ways for just a selective group of people. And we should organize it for that it works for everyone. And in the case of the Netherlands, I'm not sure about the countries you work in, but in the case of the Netherlands, it's relatively easy. We're wealthy. There's a lot of money. And like I said, we spend actually a lot of money on people with disabilities. But I think we spend it in the wrong way. Special education is much more expensive than regular education. 27 billion in care, residential care, which is a lot of money. Why don't we do it in a different way? It doesn't, if you say, like I say, treat people as equal, it doesn't say you have to be exactly like everyone else. Everyone has different support needs and different aspirations in life. But
Shantha?
I just wanted to clarify why we talk about going to a mainstream school. Maybe that's not clear to everyone, and I know that that's something that Stefan alluded to in saying he went to a special school. So the disability movement, Nujeen doesn't go to a school, I don't think. You do go to special school, actually.
Yeah.
What we try to promote is that all kids go to school together with other kids in their communities. And not that children with disabilities are segregated in a special school only for them, where maybe their teachers are not as qualified or aren't as good, where they don't have the chance to engage with kids that are different than them. And there's so many values, so many benefits of going to school together with diverse kinds of kids. There's a lot of studies, a lot of research done on this, that in fact, when you have kids with disabilities in your classroom, in any classroom, you're going to have a range of kids. You're going to have some kids who learn faster and some kids who learn slower. And so the idea of teachers learning how to cater to a diverse class actually benefits all the children. And besides that, you also learn that, meeting somebody in a wheelchair or meeting somebody who's blind isn't a big deal. I have 2 kids, 5 and 8, and they've met people with disabilities their whole life, and they don't even see the difference. They told my friend in a wheelchair, hey, can you roll over here and help me with this? And it's just a natural thing if you're exposed to it when you're from a very small age. So that's the idea that inclusive education promotes so many things, but also for your confidence to be able to interact with other children and not feel like you're stuck in a special school, segregated from everybody else is part of that.
Yeah, because I want to go, and maybe also Stefan, you can pinch in here. I would like you to respond, but I also like to ask one question to you. Yeah, because... Okay. So if you first add your contribution, then ask a question afterwards.
Vergaan over diversiteit op gewoon
Yeah, her story about diversity in the classroom.
Vroeger op toffenschool. School was klaar.
Yeah, when I was at the deaf education in the school, I had a very small class.
Toffheid. Maar het gaat verschil tussen mensen. Dus je kan tof worden.
Yeah, so he said being like the handicapped deaf doesn't discriminate within people. Like everybody can be deaf or become deaf. Yeah, so people, Dutch people, but people from all nationalities, all countries can be deaf.
Ik heb ook voortellen. Ik kan het verschillend goed.
So you said.
Klopt wel met ervaring. Ik heb het erom gaan met het er zijn.
Yeah, so he said he really resonates in your story that interacting with different cultures and also different kind of disabilities really enriched his life.
Toen ik naar later school ging, is op het zijn met een vent.
Yeah, so in his deaf education, there were a lot of nationalities in his group. But when he went to the normal education system, they were all Dutch, white, hearing people. Yeah, so it was different.
Stefan, we are talking a lot about how society, how politics can do more to include people with disabilities. You've also worked with many deaf people, you help them. Do you also ask something from them to claim their space, maybe to ask for things? How do you see that?
Nou, met werken vroeger. Het viel mij op. Mensen op straat en positief. Tekent vaak allemaal op dezelfde manier.
Yeah, so when he worked with deaf people or a lot in the past, he said he noticed that people at sleutelposities at
key positions
in society all think in the same way.
Met politieke partijen of toch mensen zelf willen ze erover.
So he said even with deaf people, but also with in the politics, like they all have the same intention, they all have the right intentions.
Maar op een plaatsniveau gaat het altijd mis.
But in the policy making, it always goes wrong.
Ze tekenen allemaal op dezelfde manier. Toven zijn te klein.
And so they always think that deaf target group is too small.
Te duur.
Too expensive.
Jullie kunnen ook wat anders doen.
Or you can change yourself. Or adapt better yourself.
Hoe kan ze vet of vragen? Maar voor de tijd moeilijk om gebruik van te maken.
And so also, although the rights are there or the law is there for deaf people to have certain rights, it's a big hurdle to get access to it.
Ik zie graag ook meer diversiteiten op die positives.
Yes, so he would like to see also more diversity in all the key positions.
Yeah.
Because het auto zeker tegenkomt, ze tekenen altijd hetzelfde.
So it doesn't matter who I really speak to at those positions; they all have the same work the same way.
Yeah. Shantha, because if we imagine is there a policymaker here in the hall maybe? No? Imagine there was one here and he or she would listen to this and think, okay, sure, I want to do more, I want to help more. I'm quite sure that, for example, in the Dutch government, they all, when they would listen to the story, would say the same, would agree, would say this is important, we need to do something about it. But what, like really practical, I don't know, ways to think or regulatory things do you advise in your work worldwide to improve the situation?
Well, one of the interesting things about this field is that it's groundbreaking. the Disability Rights Treaty has been around for going to be 12 years this year, but it's not really a long time when you're thinking about changing systems. And so I would say, you know, based on what José and I learned something about how so many children here are institutionalized, they're not put in schools. And that means that these children never grow up and get to play with their friends, never grow up in an environment. We've done research in some countries where they're laying in beds all day long with such little human contact. We met a boy with Down syndrome in Russia who we thought he was 2 or 3 years old. We picked him up and he was 18 years old, wearing a diaper, laying in a crib all day long. And I'm sure it's not much different in the Netherlands. So I would challenge the Dutch government to say, now that you've adopted this treaty, now that you say you believe in disability rights or human rights, make an example of how kids with disabilities can live in the community, adults with disabilities can live within the community and don't feel like the only alternative is for them to be locked up in institutions, segregated and warehoused for the rest of their lives. Show us some good examples and invest in that, because it's not going to happen just by closing the doors of the institution. You need to invest in communities that provide housing, that provide jobs, that provide someone to perhaps help you go to the store and live independently on your own. And I think there are not that many examples out there. And I think the Dutch, with the resources that you have here, can actually put out, I don't know, José, what you think, but I think this is a country where, you know, these pilots can be, you know, done, and it can show the rest of the world how it can be done.
And maybe I'd like to hear from you right now, because if we have to wait for our government, I get the feeling that they sort of wait for the people to ask them. We sort of lean back all. And I'm a mother of 3 children, and one of them has a disability. She's 27 years old now. She's independent. But when she was very young, I missed sometimes the support of people around me in all the difficulties you face, trying to get into school, trying to have friends.
Just to get clear, what kind of disability does she have? So we can relate to it a bit more when you talk about it.
It's very complicated, actually, but to give a picture, she cannot speak. She has difficulty controlling her body. Well, that's it, basically. And she's smart, but she has very much difficulty in expressing herself. And she makes people awkward. That's part of the problem as well. Because Nujeen, you can talk, and you can relate easily to a lot of people, but there are a lot of children or people with disabilities who have difficulty expressing themselves. You don't really understand them, and it makes people uncomfortable. You wonder, how should I deal with them? Can I talk? And the usual reaction of people is then to back off. And one of the things that is needed, I think, is that you can contribute by making people with a disability feel welcome. Just say hello, how are you doing? That's a very simple example, but it really helps. And pilots are very good, but pilots need to be, I'm looking for the English word. Followed up? Not only followed up by, but be welcomed in society as well. We need people to contribute to that kind of pilots as well. And one of the things is basically, I think very important, make people feel welcome and reach out to them.
Your daughter has a shirt, right? What does she wear?
Oh yeah. She has a T-shirt, and I think it's marvelous because people stare at her all the time. So she has a T-shirt which says, "Don't stare at me, buy me a beer instead." And she likes beer, by the way. So.
Yeah, which helps. Yeah. Nujeen, before we go to the audience, maybe you can think of your questions. The theme of the Human Rights Watch weekend is "Where do I stand?" Well, there have been many people listening to your story. Is there something you'd like everyone to hear, or one advice or one thing you would like so much to change?
The thing I would like to change is don't think of we are special, not different. I think I emphasize the point of not ignoring them and actually saying hello, making the first step and saying hello. Like you're noticing the person. Maybe I would directly address Stefan and not his interpreter when I'm talking to him, and I think that's what happens on a daily basis when you see someone who doesn't have the ability to talk. You immediately address the family members accompanying him, or I don't know. But I think it's important to make the first step and making the person himself feel comfortable. And also, another point which I would like to emphasize is the emphasis on making them feel productive in their community, and to try to figure out what are their talents and what are the subjects they are interested in, to make them feel less unusual to others. And also the point of kind of the mixed school and not just special and regular school is that it exposes non-disabled people to disabled people and raises this chance of acceptance and of erasing the stigma about people with disability and the whole range of it, not just people who can talk and just sit on a wheelchair, but also people who are mentally ill, people who have difficulty expressing themselves, as it is in your case. So I think that's what I would like to say. I think to change the stigma and think of us as special, not different, to change the mentality of the whole society about disability itself.
Yeah. Are there any questions? People would like to pitch in and say, I want to add something? Yeah. For all the viewers at
I'm going to just interrupt by saying, Eugene learned English from watching television. She didn't go to school. And I was just going to say, and she learned, right, from watching American soap operas, among other things on TV, which is why she's been exposed to so many issues, because she watched a lot of television. For some of us moms, we don't really want to teach our children that, but it's amazing to hear her speak English so well.
Thank you. Actually, I'll introduce myself, but that's a good introduction for my question,
Good.
Actually. I'm Andrea. I work for Human Rights Watch and the Film Festival. So I have a question relating to film and television, actually, and how that connects to culture and society. Maybe I just want to give a small explanation, because I may be unusual. I'm 47, I'm American, and I went to a school that included people with disabilities. So from a child, I was with people with all different kinds of disability. In particular, I had a friend growing up who was deaf, whose whole family was deaf. So became very aware of deaf culture, so this idea of culture. But my question has to do with film and television, because in the field I work in, there's a movement among actors with disabilities, so I guess what you call dramatic or fiction film, but also filmmakers in documentary who identify as a person with disability. And there's a movement to make sure that more people with disabilities are creating film and television, but also when you see film and television, that actors with disabilities actually play people with disabilities, not Matt Damon or famous actor playing, So the question is, I'm curious on the panel, do people feel like that kind of exposure in film and television can make a difference when perhaps people are not exposed directly?
Well, Nujeen, watching all the soap operas, how would you relate to this question?
Well, I've never seen a disabled person on there. Okay, so no, I can definitely see what your point. I think, so for example, there's not yet a disabled Disney princess. So
that's a call for action, right? Yeah.
So I think, we definitely need more exposure in the media to people with disabilities. And no, I've never had any problem with relating to my favorite characters. But yeah, it would be a nice change if I had someone on a wheelchair, yeah, who's a bookworm, or I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Stefan, how would you respond to this?
Ik vind het altijd goed het bioscoopfilm vertellen over de series. Verschillende soorten mensen die voorkomen.
Yeah, I always think it's a good idea. I always think it's a very good, yeah, it goes too fast. A very good idea in TV shows and in movies to see very different people, also with different disabilities.
En ik wil kijken naar Catherine kijken naar Tanatopees. Het programma gaat de vertalen in.
So he says when I look at children's programs and they watch Teletubbies, there's no diversities in those shows.
Dit heeft als gevolg mensen zoals speciaal apart voortgezet.
Yeah, and as a consequence, people like the both of you will be seen as different and special. Because it's also not in the media.
Met vrouw, zwart, komt van het voor.
Yeah, so men, women, gay people, white, black. It does now appear in movies, but
homo's, komt van het bed. Recht moeten nog.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of diversity.
Work to be done.
Yeah.
Probably they think with actors with disabilities, well, they're disabled, they can't act.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but isn't the thing also not to have people with disabilities playing only people with disabilities in a film that's about disabilities, but also just being represented?
Of course. Yeah.
As an are there any other people who would like to pitch in? Have a comment? Yeah. Yeah, and then I'll try to translate it. Yeah. Nu wel.
Ik heb even een vraag voor José. Ik weet niet of je misschien daar wat meer over kan vertellen. Ik heb een nichtje die doof is, geboren. Kun je wat meer vertellen over wat er wordt gedaan voor ouders, om ouders op te vangen? Want ik ben zelf Hindoestaans-Surinaams. Mijn tante heeft er helaas, dus haar moeder dan, zij heeft er helaas heel veel aan gedaan, onbewust misschien, om haar juist klein te houden in vergelijking met het horende zusje. En wij zijn nichtjes in de eerste lijn, dus ik ben daar heel dichtbij geweest. Maar het is eigenlijk best wel verdrietig om te zien dat het jongere zusje op alle vlakken in het leven veel meer vooruit is gekomen. En ik denk niet dat het mijn tante haar bedoeling is geweest of zo, maar een soort shock misschien. En dan ook jezelf, dat je maar gewoon meegaat in wat er wordt verteld te doen met dat dove kind.
Can I summarize the question by saying how do you help parents who have a child that's, for example, deaf to deal with it in the right manner?
Wat wordt daar aan?
And what's being
zit daar
done?
verbetering in, zeg maar?
And are there improvements?
Well, that's a very good question. And I must say that I don't see much is being done in that respect. There's no early childhood intervention. We used to have an initiative from some universities. It was a very successful project, supporting parents of children with disabilities with knowledge and, maybe some emotional advice, but also about interventions. For instance, for a deaf child, look for sign language, or for people with intellectual disabilities, you could have stimulation programs, preschool, pre-teaching. But there's no financing for that kind of pilots anymore, so it changed.
Yeah.
At Inclusion Europe, we try to, because it's not only in the Netherlands, it's within Europe as well. There need to be paid more attention to that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't wait until children go to the school age and then give them advice. You should start earlier.
Shantha, is that also in your work, in all the countries you visit, that the role of the parents should be... I come to you, Stephen. Yeah. That the role of the parents is so important, and what can you do about that to
Absolutely. I mean, in many, I gave that example of in Russia where this 18-year-old boy is in diapers. In all of those cases, parents were told your child will never walk, will never talk, will never say I love you, will never hug you. So we should just take your child away and we'll raise them in this institution. And I think there needs to be a lot more education to the doctors and how they explain it to the parents. A lot more support for the parents. These parents aren't evil. They're not. They really would have loved to raise their child, and in some cases, they actually took the child out of the institution after 1 or 2 or 3 years, seeing how they deteriorated and didn't develop. And now those kids are talking, are doing ballet, are playing with their siblings, and are much more contributing because they got the love and attention, and also the much more the services, the speech therapy, the physical therapy, and all of these things that they might need in order to do as Nujeen was saying, to contribute, to be productive. And I think parents just need to get information, and they need to get information as soon as possible. One last thing, we also, all the work we do, we develop our resources in what are called easy to read format, which I just wanted to highlight, which is used to be done by Inclusion Europe, and now we have a translator who basically converts all of Human Rights Watch's thick, hefty reports into simple languages. And when we hand this to journalists and we hand this to the government officials, they love to read this version than the big fat Human Rights Watch documents anyway, because it's simplified. And we've also done this on things like what to do if someone hurts you in terms of gender-based violence. So this talks about good touch and bad touch. And so that, because even information like that doesn't reach people with intellectual disabilities, and it's really important. So I just wanted to highlight this as one of the ways that we make our information accessible, and these are the kinds of resources that parents need also.
Yeah. Stefan, you wanted to pitch in?
Ik vind het goed dat zij er komt. Ik heb net ook verteld dat veel tof jongeren uiteindelijk zelf de ervaring hebben.
He says he thinks it's very good that you're here. And he was just telling about deaf people that are younger than him that still experience the same things.
Mijn moeder heeft een grote rol gespeeld. De beleid of imitators.
Yeah, my mother has played a very big role in the way I have developed, and it was not policy or other help.
Fijne ouders, zijn elkaar opereren.
Yeah. So, and what he notices is that a lot of parents discover things by themselves and are not connected.
Mevrouw Vertaan, zelfde vraag. Het formatie hoe aanpak. Mijn moeder, 30 jaar geleden, zelfde vraag.
So, like his mother 30 years ago, 40 years ago, has had the same questions, probably still that your sister or has at this moment, and José as well.
Dus mijn advies is zoek andere ouders op met hetzelfde probleem.
So my advice would be find other parents with the same struggles.
Die mensen hebben betere ervaring.
Yeah, those people have better experiences than turning to the official channels.
Yeah. Maybe before we go, because my last question to you would be for all of you to try to think maybe of an example of how we can, well, when we walk out of the hall, what can we do? What kind of small things that we tend to overlook maybe or not think about we can do to, well, where do I stand, give some substance to it. Is there some last person who wants to have a comment, have a question? To buy them some thinking time about their experiment? No? Then maybe, maybe we can start with Stefan. Do you have an example of what concrete things we can do now to not only give voice, but do something?
Vind ik eerder proper van vertellen, recht aan, het genoeg, moet ook goed gebruik van maken.
So what I've been trying to say earlier is that the right alone is not enough, but we should also act upon it.
You
shouldn't be held back by people that think they know better. That's what my advice would be.
That's good advice in life in general,
yeah.
I would say. José?
Apart from what I said before, by making people with a disability feel welcome, is that I think we should make haste in changing our educational system, make it inclusive for everyone. Every child go to the neighborhood school. People learn to live together in a school. So don't exempt children from going to the neighborhood school. It's a good start. I can explain a bit more. That in our current policies, we say that people with disability are supposed to participate more. When you're 18, you're supposed to go to the labor market, and it's formal policy now, the participatiewet. You probably heard about it. But it's very difficult to get a disability pension nowadays, even for children with Down syndrome. So you're supposed to find a regular job. But if you don't start at 4 years of age and you are going into a segregated system, how can we expect people from their 18th birthday to be full part of society? So that's an start at 4 or even younger.
Yeah. Shantha?
Well, just very concretely, you've heard a lot. I think I really enjoyed being a part of this panel, and I think one of the key messages has been about the stigma that people face. Mm-hmm. So go talk to your friends, tell them what you heard today, if anything struck you. Tweet Eugene, tweet me, tweet Inclusion Europe and the work that they do. Just tell people about it, because I think part of us breaking down the stigma is not being afraid to talk about people with disabilities. And what I always find every time I do this every day, but I find that there's so many people who have hidden disabilities or family members with disabilities or went to a school with kids with disabilities, things I didn't know, and it comes out of those conversations and it builds, I think, more engagement, more trust, more openness to the diversity. And so go talk to people about what you heard about today. Watch the films on people with disabilities at different film festivals, and just help us get the word out, including people that and influence who can speak about it, and help us break down the walls.
Yeah, Nujeen?
Yeah, I think one thing I would advise is being curious about someone around you who's with disability. Just actually breaking down the stigma starts from being exposed to them, as we mentioned earlier, but also being curious about what kind of disability they have, dealing with it as something that makes them special, not different. So if someone has, I don't know, maybe he's depressed or has Down syndrome or I don't know, maybe a cerebral palsy, be curious about them and educate yourself. Try to learn sign language. It's just another language. Maybe, it would open a new horizons for you as well. So I think being curious and trying you yourself making an effort to break down the stigma is really valuable and makes a lot of difference. And also, as I said, addressing the person himself when you're talking to him, not the assistant or the family member. The change starts from your own self. So that's what I would advise: being curious and trying to deal with people with disability as people who are special, not different, or people who lack something you have.
Yeah. As people who are equal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, to conclude, we can just also maybe say it's a plea for just, what we would love to consider mere humanity and openness and curiosity, actually.
Yeah. Great.
That's what I heard from you. I really thought this was quite important what we did, quite inspirational. I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank Martina for coming on such short notice to help us out. It was really helpful. I'd also like to give him a warm welcome, give him a warm hand of applause, Stefan, José. Also, Shantha, keep up the good work. Thank you so much for being here. And lastly, I thought it was really a privilege talking to you, and I think you got the world figured out quite well. I hope you also find the universe in your physics study. And I hope this conversation will not be necessary in a few years anymore, because we've figured it out. Give them a warm hand of applause, and enjoy the rest of your weekend at Human Rights Watch weekend. Thank you.